Let's talk about Parnesse the Subtle Brush. For 2 blue, black, red, we have a 4/4 vampire wizard. Whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless that player pays for life. Whenever you copy a spell, up to one target opponent may also copy that spell. They may choose new targets for that copy. So our commander Parnesse really takes advantage of whenever we copy spells, we can have other opponents also have a copy, and we can probably manipulate them, in a good way mind you, or I should say encourage them to target our other opponents instead of us, because if they do target us or our permanents, they lose 4 life. So let's talk about the ways that we can start copying our spells. Creative technique. For 4 and a red we have a sorcery that has demonstrate. When you cast this spell, you may copy it. If you do, choose an opponent to also copy it. So now we're going to get this plus a copy, and remember, whenever we copy a spell, we can give it to an opponent with our commander, and creative technique can also give them a copy as well. So we could potentially give them 2 copies if we wanted, but this says shuffle your library, then reveal cards from the top of it until you reveal a non-land card. Exile that card and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. This is a very powerful spell, so we need to be careful when giving this to our opponent, but it is accomplishing us copying our spells. Curse of Echoes. For 4 and a blue, it's an aura curse where we can enchant a player, and whenever the enchanted player casts an instant or sorcery spell, each other player may copy that spell and may choose new targets for the copy he or she controls. This card gets out of hand, so I really recommend if you play this to be very careful, because you're going to have to know in which order things have to happen when it comes to player order, and also this will definitely draw out the game. Double Vision. 3 red, it's an enchantment. Whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell, each turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. This is exactly what we want to do, so having a card like this in the deck is perfect. Double Cast. For 2 red, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Sadly, this is at sorcery speed, but we do have a card in here that can allow our sorceries to be at instant speed, which will be very helpful, and I'll mention that later. Next is Echo Mage, and you may have not heard of this card because of the level up ability. So if we cast this for 1 and 2 blue, we get a human wizard that's a 2/3, and it has level up for 1 and a blue. If we pay 1 and a blue, we can put a level counter on this card, and level up we can only do as a sorcery. So levels 2 to 3, we can pay 2 blue, tap it, copy target instant or sorcery spell. We can choose new targets for the copy, and whenever it gets to level 4 or more, we can pay 2 blue, tap it, copy target instant or sorcery spell twice, and we can still choose new targets for the copies. This is definitely a budget card for copying our spells, but it gets the job done, so I love it. Incarnation Technique. This also has demonstrate. We can cast this spell and we may copy it, and if we do, our opponent gets to copy this as well. We will mill 5, then return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Most importantly, I care about copying spells, so even if our opponent gets a bigger advantage over this, this is where we need to bring in our persuasive skills or our social skills working with our opponents. We need to start making deals with them, so for example, if they have a really good creature in their graveyard, they can get it back to their battlefield. But let's say that if we allow that to happen, that creature will not swing at us for X amount of turns, or we're friends and they owe us a favor. Definitely be sure to use your social skills for this one. There's Replication Technique, another great demonstrate card, and this one allows us to create a token that's a copy of target permanent we control. This is awesome because we can copy any of our enchantments that let us double our instants and sorceries, copy a mana rock if we really need it, a land, any permanent we control. Speaking of enchantments that let us copy our instants and sorceries, we have Swarm Intelligence. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the spell. There's also Twinning Staff. If you would copy a spell 1 or more times, instead copy it that many times plus an additional time, you may choose new targets for the additional copy, which is great. We can also pay 7 and tap this to copy an instant or sorcery spell we control, and you may choose new targets for the copy. 7 is a lot of mana, and if we have the extra mana and we're not able to copy our spells with anything else, this is always an option. But more importantly, we care about just the static ability. If you would copy a spell, then this is perfect. There's also Wandering Archaic. This is a little more of an expensive card, coming in at $4.62 at the time, and it says whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, they may pay 2 mana. If they don't, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Let's say it's turn 5, we cast this, and for some reason our opponents are casting Cultivate during this time. If they don't pay an extra 2 mana, we get to have a Cultivate of our own, especially in Grixis, which is red, blue, black, which doesn't have a lot of ramp because we don't have green. This is a wonderful card, but it's not just ramp. We're talking lightning bolts, we're talking making making copies of things, this is going to be a great card if they don't pay the 2 mana. So enough about copying our spells, let's move on to some of the removal in the deck. We have a Braid for 1 and a red. This is an instant that allows us to choose one of these. We can deal 3 damage to a target creature or destroy target artifact with our commander, and other ways to copy stuff. Let's say we get this spell plus a copy, so we have 2 Abrades, and we happen to give one to our opponent. Again, we really want to work in the social aspect of commander. If we give them an Abrade, maybe we can encourage them to deal 3 damage to someone else's commander. But if they happen to lose our trust and they don't follow through with what we were asking when we give them the copy, if they decide to point it at us or our permanents, they will have to lose 4 life, and we also know not to trust them for future turns. So that's something we're going to have to feel throughout each one of our games if we're playing with people we don't know, or someone just decides to last minute break that trust. Next is Chaos Warp for 2 and a red. It's an instant. We're going to take someone's permanent on the battlefield, shuffle it in their library, and then reveal the top card of their library. If it's a permanent, they put it onto the battlefield. This is always a fun one to have in commander games because it could be anything. They could have a powerful spell on the battlefield that we remove for a little bit, and they could end up putting it back on the top of their library just by random sake, and that's always hilarious. Or if they get a land, this is always a great one to have. Feed the Swarm. This is ridiculously very cheap. It's only a quarter for 1 and a black. It's a sorcery. Destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. So in Magic, black is not good at taking care of enchantments, and so this is a way to do that, and at this really low cost. While it is a sorcery speed, it's super good to be able to take care of creature or enchantment at the time. Let's talk about Negate. This is for 1 and a blue, an instant, counter target non-creature spell. That means we can mess up enchantments, artifacts, instant sorceries. We get a wide variety of things that we can take care of for only 2 mana. Reality Shift for 1 and a blue, we can exile target creature, and its controller has to manifest the top card of the library. So they get a 2/2, and if it's a creature that they exiled face down, they can turn it face up at any time for its mana cost. Let's talk about some of the ramp in the deck. We have Arcane Signet. We can pay 2 mana for this artifact. We can tap it, and we can add 1 color of mana equal to our commander's color identity, so we can have red, blue, or black from this sweet artifact. We have Commander's Sphere, does the same thing, but it costs 3, and we can also sacrifice it later to draw a card if we need it. We have Izzet Signet and Rakdos Signet. We can pay 2, and as long as we pay 1 mana into this, we get 2 mana. We also have Mind Stone and Soul Ring. We get colorless mana from these, which can be very helpful whenever we're casting a huge instant or sorcery. And then one of my favorites is Stormkiln Artist. Whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery, we get to create a treasure token. And so now this will start counting our copies, and so this gets out of hand very easily. We also have ways to reduce our instants and sorceries. We have Arcane Melee, Goblin Electromancer, and Wizards of Thay. These will make things a lot easier whenever we're casting our huge spells, or we just don't have enough mana at the time to be casting these awesome spells. I mentioned earlier about making our sorcery spells have flash. So let's talk about Hypersonic Dragon. For 3 blue and a red, we have a 4/4 dragon with flying and haste. You may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash, which now means our sorceries have instant speed, so we can now take advantage of casting them on our opponent's turn, or even on our turn in response to something. Very powerful card, and it's only 23 cents. Now moving on to drawing cards, we have Ambition's Cost for 3 and a black. It's a sorcery, and it says you draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. There's also Archmage Emeritus, another great card because this is counting whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery, we're drawing a card. There's Damnable Pact for X black black. It's a sorcery that says target player draws X and lose X life. So the instant and sorcery reducers that I mentioned earlier, they actually count towards our X. So if we have Arcane Melee out, and that says our instants and sorceries cost 2 less, that's already paying for 2 cards if we just put 2 black into this, which is very powerful. Let's talk about Keep Watch. For 2 and a blue, it's an instant. Draw a card for each attacking creature. Now, most likely, we're not going to use this on ourselves. We're actually going to use this during an opponent's turn, and we can find ways to copy it and draw a huge amount of cards. Even if they're attacking with 4 creatures, we pay 3, draw 4. We happen to have Swarm Intelligence out, which lets us get a copy of our instants and sorceries. So now we draw 8 for 3 mana. That can be very silly. There's also Notion Thief. For 2 blue black, it's a 3/1 human rogue with flash. If an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead a player skips that draw and you draw a card. So this is a sneaky way of grabbing our opponent's cards whenever they should have them. Instead, we are keeping them. A fun card to copy is Unexpected Windfall for 2 and 2 red. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you have to discard a card, but whenever we start copying this spell, we don't have to pay that additional cost anymore. So we discard a card, draw 2, create 2 treasure tokens. We happen to have Swarm Intelligence out, so for 4 mana we draw 4, create 4 mana, which is super silly. So ultimately, we are going to overwhelm the game and our opponents with making tokens. So let's talk about that. We have Murmuring Mystic, Talrand Sky Summoner, and Young Pyromancer. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we're going to put a token onto the battlefield, but remember, these don't count whenever we copy a spell. They're still very good, but if they were to copy the spell, if they were to create tokens while we copied our spells, that would be extremely broken, but still, great cards for us to have in this deck. There's also Hordling Outburst and Krankos Command. Now, you're probably confused why these are in the deck, and I put them in here because we can copy our instants and sorceries. So we can pay 2 mana for Krankos Command, get 2 1/1 goblins. Turns out we have a way to copy our instants and sorceries. We pay 2 mana, we get 4 goblins, or even 6, etc. So while it is a one-time effect, we can still be paying super cheap mana and get a huge effect. The last card I want to mention is Army of the Damned for 5 black, black, black. It's a sorcery. Create 13 tapped 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, and it has flashback for 7 black, black, black. If we're able to copy this, as I mentioned before, this can get out of hand very quickly. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love this playlist right here. I talk about more EDH deck techs, and they're all budget, usually $100 or less, just like this one. This deck comes out to $40, and thank you to the patron Drewby. You can also become a patron to help support the channel and see your decks made into a video. Peace.